Did retribution in ancient Persia serve true justice, or did it conceal something more sinister and profound? When the dust of execution chambers choked the breath from Menelaus, was this divine judgment or ceremonial cruelty? In a civilization where agony meant purification of the soul and legislation mirrored celestial will, suffering became holy. Yet who determined what equilibrium required restoration, and at what price? Join us as we uncover the mysteries of a judicial framework wrapped in terror, devotion, and flame. The Persian Empire, spanning enormous territories across the ancient world, earned recognition not merely for its magnificent structures, advanced infrastructure, and mighty military victories. Beyond the imperial splendor lay a remarkably organized and systematic legal framework. Unlike the chaotic or random nature often attributed to ancient societies, Persia operated under clearly defined codified regulations. Their justice approach was both precise and frequently ruthlessly harsh. Established by Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenid Empire prioritized maintaining truth and righteousness above all else. This transcended mere governmental policy, representing a fundamental cultural principle deeply embedded within Persian civilization. A powerful cultural and religious foundation firmly opposed dishonesty, serving as the cornerstone of judicial administration. Herodotus, the renowned Greek chronicler, noted that Persian youth learned only 3 fundamental skills from childhood: horsemanship, archery, and truthfulness. This final teaching wasn't simply personal moral guidance. It constituted a civic and legal requirement. Honesty in Persia wasn't voluntary but compulsory, particularly regarding legal and political affairs. Deception, especially in judicial testimony, commercial negotiations, or state matters, wasn't merely viewed as moral weakness. It was treated as grave misconduct threatening the entire social and political structure. Persian thinking regarded falsehood as disrupting harmony and societal equilibrium. Consequently, such violations received severe treatment, often resulting in brutal outcomes. In numerous instances, particularly within judicial or governmental contexts, lying could result in execution. This demonstrates how seriously Persians regarded dishonesty. The punishment concept in Persia carried deep philosophical and linguistic significance. The Persian term for punishment simultaneously meant to interrogate. This subtle yet powerful detail reflects how investigation, contemplation, and judgment intertwined within Persian legal thinking. Justice wasn't merely administrative duty, but sacred obligation connecting earthly legal systems with divine cosmic balance. To maintain this justice standard, the empire established organized, multi-tiered judicial hierarchy. Judges received careful selection, often chosen from noble or priestly classes, individuals believed to possess wisdom, education, and moral discipline necessary for fair judgment. These judges were expected to remain completely incorruptible. Despite emphasizing integrity, the state recognized human fallibility and imposed strict consequences for judicial misconduct. One notorious case exemplifying Persia's zero-tolerance policy toward judicial corruption involved Sesamnes, a judge serving under Cambyses II. When Sesamnes was discovered accepting bribes and corrupting judicial processes, his punishment was both brutal and symbolic. He was flayed alive, his skin used to upholster the seat where the next judge, his own son, would preside. The grim message was clear: every judgment from that seat should consider the full cost of betraying justice. This gruesome punishment served as constant visible reminder that judicial corruption would never be tolerated. Persia's legal system wasn't centralized in one court, but functioned at multiple levels. Local courts managed civil and domestic disputes, while royal courts handled serious criminal cases. Military tribunals disciplined soldiers and enforced army regulations. Religious courts, influenced by Zoroastrian doctrine, managed spiritual and ecclesiastical matters. This division enabled efficient management of vast territories and diverse populations. In many cases, the accused could defend themselves, some securing legal representation at their own expense. Witnesses testified under oath, and false testimony, being a form of lying, was considered serious crime, often attracting severe punishments. Despite its harsh reputation, the Persian legal code wasn't entirely without mercy. Signs of judicial progressiveness existed. Bail systems operated for certain crimes, and not every offense led to torture or death. Some infractions, especially minor ones, were punished through fines or brief imprisonment. Family law received notable importance. Legal codes emphasized responsibilities among family members, particularly within households, showing early understanding of structured social roles and accountability. This legal philosophy extended beyond Persian heartland. Provincial governors possessed some legal autonomy while still adhering to Central Persian legal framework principles. Archaeological discoveries, including legal documents, contracts, and marriage licenses from various Persian administrative centers, confirm existence of highly bureaucratic and legally aware society. These documents provide remarkable glimpses into advanced administrative systems governing everything from personal disputes to large-scale governance. Questions remain about practical fairness. While Persian kings preached ideals of fairness and divine justice, real-world application sometimes favored the elite. Nobles occasionally transferred punishments to servants, and royal family members often escaped direct consequences for serious offenses. Such exceptions highlighted both ideals and limitations of Persian justice. What made Persian justice both respected and feared was its unique fusion of law and spirituality. Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion, taught that every moral choice carried cosmic consequences. Crimes like lying, stealing, or corrupt judgment weren't merely offenses against people. They disrupted universal order of Osha, sacred cosmic truth. The king wasn't only ruler, but guardian of divine order. Enforcing law wasn't just political necessity, but holy obligation. But what happened when the justice system abandoned words and fines, turning full attention to the human form through mutilation, flogging, and blinding? The human body in ancient Persia represented far more than flesh and blood. It served as public canvas, permanent record, and living warning. Within Persian justice, the body became both site and symbol of punishment. Justice wasn't something merely endured. It was worn, often for life. Physical punishments aimed not only to inflict pain or temporarily restrict behavior, but to leave lasting visible evidence of guilt and shame. These brutal mutilation acts were deeply retributive while serving broader deterrent purposes. The concept was simple yet chilling. If others witnessed your scars, missing limbs, or blinded eyes, they would reconsider committing similar crimes. Among most common and severe punishments was amputation. Thieves bore the brunt of this brutal policy. In Persian state eyes, stealing, whether gold or grain, wasn't merely property offense but assault on societal harmony. Caught thieves, even if driven by hunger, faced swift and irreversible punishment, hand removal. This aimed to strip offenders of their ability to repeat crimes. Repeat offenders suffered worse consequences. In some provinces, additional limbs were removed for continued thefts. Both hands, or sometimes hand and foot, might be severed depending on crime severity and frequency. Results were unmistakable. Anyone seeing mutilated individuals could instantly recognize their past wrongdoing. Bodies became verdicts. These horrific practices weren't limited to thieves. Liars and their supporters could face physical mutilation. Those convicted of following or aiding known liars might have ears sliced off. The reasoning was deeply symbolic. Listening to lies made one complicit, and ears, organs used to absorb deception, were punished accordingly. In other instances, feet were amputated for crimes requiring movement or trespass, such as burglary or unauthorized entry into restricted or sacred areas. These acts ensured accused would be not only disabled, but forever marked as violators of societal and religious boundaries. One of most horrifying penalties for political dissent or betrayal was blinding. This method was often reserved for high-status individuals, rebellious governors, treasonous nobles, or anyone considered significant political threat to empire stability. Blinding typically involved inserting hot metal rods, pins, or irons directly into eyes. This gruesome punishment achieved two primary goals: eliminating individuals' ability to pose further physical or political danger while serving as devastating public message. It demonstrated that empire was always watching and would go to unimaginable lengths to preserve authority and order. Another widely used corporal punishment was whipping, commonly called striping in Persian records. Persian striping wasn't ordinary whipping. It was extensive, excruciating, and often prolonged across multiple sessions. Lash numbers could range from dozens to literally thousands, depending on crime nature. Historical accounts suggest extreme cases where individuals received up to 10,000 lashes. Since no one could survive such punishment in single session, stripes were administered over days or weeks, prolonging physical torment and public humiliation. Each stripe was delivered as separate, deliberate act, often by different executioners working in rotation. These punishments weren't carried out in isolation, but as public spectacles staged to create fear and reinforce law obedience. Victims were tied to stakes or wooden posts in town square centers, where townspeople were encouraged or required to watch. Whips were crafted from twisted leather or rope embedded with metal or bone, maximizing pain and ensuring permanent scarring. These punishments didn't just torment bodies, they scarred minds and souls. Even society's most vulnerable weren't exempt. Beggars accused of cheating, stealing, or inciting public disorder could face mutilation or whipping from local village judges. Persian system harshness blurred thin lines between survival and criminality. Someone asking for food could be suspected of dishonesty and punished accordingly. In such unforgiving legal atmosphere, mercy was rare commodity. Adding to system complexities was entrenched class bias. While Persian justice preached impartiality, practice told different stories. In known cases, nobles and royals found ways to escape punishment by sending servants or subordinates in their place. If nobleman was convicted of crimes like harming sacred animals, violations carrying hundreds of lashes, he could dispatch servants to endure punishment instead. Though not formally recognized by law, this disturbing loophole was tolerated in certain circles, exposing stark inequality in justice dispensation. Despite imbalance, underlying Persian justice principles remained hauntingly consistent. Human body was ledger. Each scar, lost limb, and sensory loss represented ledger lines recording crimes committed and punishments received. These weren't random or excessive cruelty acts, but carefully calculated state-sanctioned messages to populations. States didn't just punish wrongdoers, they used them as living warnings. Messages were chillingly clear. Deviate from law and punishment wouldn't end with pain. It would live on your body forever. What if justice demanded more than permanent damage? What if it required your skin, breath, or very presence as warning? Flaying and judicial terror symbols. In Persian Empire, justice was never merely sentence delivered behind closed doors. It was spectacle. Carefully orchestrated display meant to leave lasting impressions on all witnesses. Justice served in ancient Persia wasn't just about correcting wrongs, but constructing powerful warnings echoing throughout society. When crimes were considered too severe to overlook or dangerous to forgive, punishment left no room for redemption. It didn't simply end life. It transformed life into permanent, horrifying example. Among most feared and gruesome punishments was flaying. skin removal while still alive. Flaying wasn't impulsive or spontaneous cruelty act. It was deliberate, ceremonial, and soaked in symbolism. Perhaps most famous and frequently cited case is Sisamnes, judge serving under Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great. Sisamnes was discovered accepting bribes in exchange for favorable judgments. In Persian worldview, where truth and justice were almost sacred duties, his offense wasn't simply personal failing but betrayal of cosmic order. Cambyses didn't settle for standard execution. He ordered Sisamnes flayed alive. The king had judges' skin preserved and used as upholstery for judicial seat. Sisamnes' own son was appointed as replacement and forced to sit on father's remains every time he presided over court. This chilling arrangement wasn't only punishment but daily lesson in integrity and fear. Grotesque yet effective reminder that Persian justice couldn't be compromised. Flaying wasn't limited to judicial corruption. Same punishment was reserved for crimes like treason, rebellion, and betrayal of royal trust. These offenses struck at imperial authorities' heart, and penalties reflected such acts' seriousness. Methods varied depending on region and crime severity. Sometimes thin skin strips were removed from specific areas like back, arms, or chest. In most severe situations, process involved nearly all skin removal from body. Regardless of method, aims remained same, prolonging victims' pain as long as possible without causing immediate death. Modern medical understanding suggests most victims likely died from shock combination, massive blood loss, or cardiac arrest. Pain experienced during such punishment would have been beyond comprehension. In cases where victims managed to survive initial ordeals, death almost certainly followed from infection or exposure effects. Still, goals were never merely death. Suffering mattered. The longer person remained alive during or after punishment, the more effective warnings became. Their agony was transformed into governance tools. While flaying wasn't uniquely Persian invention, Achaemenids mastered its symbolic potential. They knew how to turn violence acts into messages. Executed criminals' skin wasn't always buried or discarded. Sometimes it was publicly displayed, hung on city gates, or used to cover ceremonial objects. Meanings were unmistakable. This person defied law and became lesson. In Persian authorities' eyes, justice wasn't just about removing threats, it was about making examples. Another powerful account tells of judge who, like Sisamnes, was flayed for dishonesty. His skin was stretched and fastened over seats where future judges would sit. Every decision passed from that court would be made with his punishment's silent presence looming over proceedings. It was a way to bind memory and morality together. Pain wasn't just private consequence, it was preserved as public memory. In Persian justice, no stronger law reminder existed than courtrooms stained with past. Flaying acts required more than brutality, they required expertise. Executioners carrying out these punishments were often highly trained. If victims died too quickly, it was considered failure, and sometimes executioners themselves faced punishment. This pressure gave rise to small groups of infamous specialists, executioners who perfected slow, deliberate methods required. They were more than law enforcers. They were agony craftsmen. Slow, calculated hands were valued far more than hasty ones. Each cut had to serve purposes of prolonging life, just enough to let pain do its work. Not every flaying instance occurred within judicial settings. It was also political control method. Regional governors, rebellious nobles, and military leaders threatening emperor power could find themselves subjected to knives. In these cases, flaying wasn't just punishment but legacy erasure method. Empire demonstrated that no rank or title could shield one from justice. If governors could be stripped of skin, no one was safe. In certain instances, punishment didn't end in death. Accounts exist of partial flaying, where specific body sections were skinned and persons left alive. These individuals were forced to walk among public, disfigured and agonized. Their presence served as mobile warnings, moving displays of imperial wrath. In many ways, their fate was more terrifying than death itself. They became living corpses, carrying punishment with every agonizing step, seen and pitied, yet feared and reviled. Though some historians question these stories' frequency or accuracy, multiple ancient sources, supported by archaeological references, confirm flaying was indeed practiced in ancient Persia. Whether imposed on corrupt judges, rebellious governors, or crown traitors, purposes remained consistent. Punishment wasn't about erasing guilty, it was about making their memory inescapable. Persian justice didn't end with verdict. It began with scream and lived on in skin. Slow deaths, when air became enemy. What if death didn't come quickly? What if it crept slowly, hidden in air, insects, and your own failing breath? Tortures that slowly led to death. Some punishments in ancient Persia were never meant to be swift. They were designed as long-drawn agony spectacles, turning execution acts into prolonged horror that punished not just body but soul. These punishments sent shockwaves through society, terrifying any who dared defy empire order. Goals were to break spirit completely and use one person's suffering as deterrent for thousands. In ancient Persia, cruelty wasn't just punishment byproduct, it was method. Among most chilling methods was one involving ashes. This punishment didn't rely on weapons, fire, or blades. It used something as simple as dust, but in deadly and terrifying ways. Condemned persons would be sealed inside specially constructed rooms partially filled with very fine ash. No windows, exits, or hope existed. Once inside, they were forced to stand upright in ash as long as they could. As strength waned, they inevitably collapsed. That's when real horror began. With faces down in ash, each breath became struggle. Fine particles entered nostrils, then mouth, and finally lungs. Suffocation was slow and agonizing. Victims remained conscious long enough to feel ash tightening in chests with every shallow breath, inching closer to death while unable to scream or move. This wasn't accidental. Outside sealed chambers, executioners used rotating paddle or fan systems that kept ash constantly stirred. Motion ensured air remained heavy with dust, making breathing even harder. With no food or water, bodies quickly dehydrated and exhaustion set in. But death didn't come quickly, sometimes taking many hours, even day or more. Chamber silence, broken only by quiet ash movement and slow collapse of person fighting to breathe, was deliberately crafted nightmare. This method was often reserved for traitors, those accused of political betrayal or religious offense. Punishment served not just as execution, but statement that betrayal would be met with complete erasure. No blood, no burial, only ash. Another gruesome method remembered from ancient Persian annals is scaphism. Execution form so grotesque it seems like horror tale. Name scaphism comes from Greek word for boat, described most vividly by Plutarch quoting earlier historian Ctesias. In this punishment, victim was stripped naked and placed between two hollowed-out boats or logs. Arms, legs, and head were left exposed while rest of body was trapped between wooden shells. But this was only beginning. Once secured, victim was force-fed large quantities of milk and honey, far beyond what body could handle. This induced severe diarrhea, soaking boat interior and coating body. Same milk and honey mixture was then smeared across exposed flesh. Purpose was clear: attracting insects. Flies, beetles, and other pests swarmed helpless victim, drawn by sweetness and waste. Over following days, insects laid eggs in open wounds and maggots began breeding. Body started decaying while person remained alive and fully conscious. Suffering from hunger, pain, sunburn, insect bites, and extreme infection, victim would eventually die from septic shock combination, dehydration, and sheer exhaustion. This process could stretch out for days. Some reportedly survived weeks in this state. Scaphism wasn't used for ordinary crimes. It was sentence for most reviled acts: crown betrayal, god insults, or crimes threatening society's fabric. Whether Persians widely used this method is still debated. Some historians believe it was exaggerated or invented by Greek sources seeking to portray Persians as uncivilized and monstrous. Others believe Scaphism reflects real methods employed in isolated but important cases, particularly when empire wanted to make unforgettable examples. Regardless of accuracy debates, both ash suffocation and Scaphism reflect core truth about ancient Persian justice. Punishment was more than law. It was spectacle, theater, and above all, reflection of cosmic justice. Under Zoroastrianism teachings, empire's dominant religion, sin and corruption weren't merely crimes, they were threats to universe balance. When someone broke moral or social codes, it wasn't just personal failing, it was believed to ripple across creation. Therefore, punishment had to match crime's spiritual weight. Brutal death wasn't just retribution, it was seen as cleansing form, necessary evil to restore harmony. This spiritual dimension added justification layers to even cruelest punishments. Chilling example comes from Menelaus' execution, Jewish high priest who collaborated with enemy forces. He was sentenced to ash suffocation death, not only for treachery but as public statement of cosmic retribution. His suffering was held up as both lesson and ritual meant to purify realm through his pain. Still, modern scholars continue questioning some methods' authenticity. While ash chamber has more corroborated descriptions, Scaphism exists mostly in Greek texts. It's possible these depictions were exaggerated propaganda designed to make Persian Empire seem barbaric. Yet even if specifics were embellished, messages remain clear. Ancient Persia was civilization where punishment could be as poetic as it was horrific, where justice walked hand in hand with fear, and where death itself was used to deliver divine balance. But when fire and metal replaced air and insects, could pain become even more personal and immediate? Execution by tools and elements. In vast and disciplined Persian Empire realm, execution was rarely just way to end life. It was carefully crafted ritual, often layered with symbolism and terrifying spectacle. These punishment acts weren't only aimed at condemned, but at hearts and minds of watchers. Materials like metal, wood, and fire weren't chosen randomly. They served dual purposes, inflicting physical pain while delivering powerful messages. Death in ancient Persia could be slow, shocking, and unforgettable. It was meant to teach obedience, loyalty, and crushing cost of defiance lessons. Among most gruesome Persian punishments was molten metal use. This wasn't merely cruelty act, but calculated statement. Infamous Queen Persica's tale is one of most cited examples. She was Darius II's wife, often portrayed in Greek historical accounts as both ruthless and cunning. According to these sources, she had molten lead, or in some versions molten gold, poured into enemies' ears or eyes. These enemies were often accused of deception or betrayal. Idea of pouring liquid metal into perception organs was heavy with symbolism. It wasn't just killing act. It was metaphor for corrupt vision and false hearing. It suggested those who misused senses, who saw treachery and spoke lies, deserved to have those faculties destroyed. Another equally dramatic story involved Roman Emperor Valerian. After being captured during disastrous military campaign against Persian Empire, he fell into King Shapur I's hands. What followed was a sequence of events that shocked even cruelest minds of time. According to some accounts, Valerian was used as human footstool for Shapur. He was publicly humiliated and treated worse than slave. final blow came in execution form, so bizarre it was hard to forget. It was said molten gold was poured down his throat. Whether this actually happened or was Roman propaganda product is still debated. But regardless of truth, tale spread far and wide. It was remembered because it demonstrated how Persians could turn execution into philosophical punishment. If Valerian had been greedy for power, then gold, melted and deadly, became his downfall instrument. Metal use was brutal, but would offered even more horrifying possibilities. Impalement was one of signature punishments under Persian kings like Darius I. This isn't hearsay. It's confirmed in carvings and inscriptions like famous Behistun inscription, recording in great detail how Darius suppressed uprisings. Those who resisted were captured and impaled by thousands. Unlike swift executions like hanging or beheading, impalement was designed to be slow, painful, and deeply humiliating. Process was cruelly methodical. Stake was inserted through body, often from lower abdomen or rectum, and victim was lifted upright so gravity would slowly drag body downward. To prolong agony, executioners often applied grease to pole. This reduced friction and slowed bleeding, making it more likely victim would remain alive for hours, even days. Ropes and supports were used to keep body upright, ensuring slow stake passage through organs. Victims cried, begged, and shook in agony. This suffering became powerful deterrent to rebellion or disobedience. Different impalement styles existed depending on messages executions were meant to send. Vertical impalement drove stake through body from bottom to top. Horizontal impalement passed stake side to side or front to back. One of most feared methods was anal impalement, where deliberately blunt stake was used. This avoided immediate major organ damage, ensuring victims stayed alive longer. Sometimes they were made to stand on tiptoe while suspended by stake. The moment they could no longer bear strain and relaxed, stake would begin slow, fatal ascent through body. Although fire was considered sacred in Zoroastrianism and generally avoided in executions, it occasionally played roles. Persians viewed fire as holy element not to be used for disposing human remains. Burning someone alive was considered taboo because it desecrated body and soul. Still, in exceptional cases, fire may have been used to brand criminals or sear wounds after torture. In other rare instances, it might have served as ultimate punishment for those whose crimes were seen as beyond redemption. Fire in these moments became tool of both physical agony and spiritual destruction. It erased proper burial possibility, denying dead their path to peace. Even nature wasn't safe from being transformed into execution device. Certain punishments made use of trees in horrifying ways. In one method, two saplings were bent toward each other, and victims' limbs were tied to each. Once tension was released, trees snapped back violently, tearing body in opposite directions. Execution was over in seconds, but message lingered. It warned how rebellion could split person apart. Quite literally, all these punishments were layered in meaning. Metal stood for unshakable authority and cold precision. Wood was raw, organic, and inescapable, symbol of divine justice rooted in nature. Fire was sacred but unforgiving, used only when total erasure message was required. Persian Empire used these elements not just to kill but to teach. Each execution told story. Each punishment reinforced empire strength, king's authority, and fate awaiting traitors. In ancient Persia, death was never simple. It was spectacle, lesson, and terrifying promise. What if state chose not death, but slow unraveling of your dignity? Pain echoing through city moment by haunting moment. Public punishment and shame. Punishment in Persian Empire was rarely aimed at just individuals. Instead, crimes were treated as disruptions to larger social and political order. Consequences reflected that belief. Instead of quiet justice behind closed doors, penalties were meant to be public spectacles. These displays were carefully designed to instill fear, assert state power, and keep population obedient. Single person's suffering was transformed into powerful warning to thousands. One of most disturbing features of ancient Persian justice was way it turned punishment into performance. Rebels, traitors, and even petty thieves could find themselves placed on display before their own communities. Common method involved chaining convicted person to city gates or powerful official homes. Symbolism was brutal and clear. These gates represented control, order, and law. Punished were displayed as broken examples of what happens to those challenging that order. To increase suffering, victims were often mutilated before exposure. Noses or ears were sliced off. In some cases, tendons were damaged so person couldn't walk or raise arms. They were left in agony, exposed to weather and stares of everyone passing by. But cruelty didn't stop there. Public was expected to participate in keeping victim alive. Bystanders might be ordered to give water or food, not out of kindness but to prolong torment. In twisted sense, mercy was turned into torture. Longer victims survived, longer they could suffer. During this time, physical abuse, mockery, and humiliation were common. Children might be told to spit on prisoner. Adults hurled insults or kicked chained figure. This punishment form attacked not only body but spirit. It broke person piece by piece, often over many days. Sometimes punishment went beyond individual. Families of condemned were dragged into spectacle as well. One of the most terrifying stories comes from Queen Amestris' reign, wife of King Xerxes I. Ancient historian Herodotus wrote that she ordered 14 noble children buried alive. Act was possibly political move disguised as religious ritual. Whether this specific account is accurate or not, it represents deeply rooted belief in collective punishment. Loyalty to empire was sacred. Any hint of betrayal could invite unimaginable consequences, not just for accused but for everyone connected to them. Another gruesome punishment was stoning. This method was often used against those of lower status, servants, slaves, and poor. Accused were surrounded by neighbors who were forced to pick up stones and throw them until death occurred. In some variations, goal was to knock person unconscious. If victims survived initial attack, they were left to die without aid. This execution kind wasn't only violent but deeply psychological. It turned communities into justice instruments and ensured no one forgot lesson. Cases existed where rebels or criminals weren't executed right away. Instead, they were disfigured and made into walking examples. Persian authorities would cut off ear, slice nose, or otherwise mutilate criminal. Then they would be forced to walk through their own neighborhoods, showing everyone what they had become. Body became permanent crime reminder. For some, this humiliation was more devastating than death. If crime was serious enough, person would eventually be returned to gates and chained again, this time until death finally claimed them. Although Persian legal system allowed appeals and trials, once public punishment was ordered, it was rarely reversed. Crowd was no longer just witness. It became part of justice process. In fact, refusing to participate in these punishments was considered crime in some regions. Citizens were required to enforce suffering, not just observe it. Boundaries between judge, executioner, and ordinary person were erased. Justice system made everyone complicit. Through that shared guilt, empire maintained control. Shame was as destructive as physical pain. Punished families often carried crime stain for generations. Their homes were avoided. Marriages became harder to arrange. Even children were bullied for parents' guilt. Entire families could be banished, their property seized, their names erased from records. In Persian society, honor was everything. Losing it meant being cast out socially and spiritually. Public shame wasn't just punishment. It was sentence lasting long after wounds healed. Even those who managed to survive rarely returned to normal life. Body scars were permanent, but damage went deeper. They became walking reminders of failure and pain. People avoided them. Friends abandoned them. For survivor, every day became quiet continuation of their punishment. Though they breathed, they no longer truly lived. Persian Empire used punishment not just as crime reaction, but as psychological warfare tool. Goal was to make examples so horrific, so unforgettable that disobedience would vanish before it began. But as history tells us, fear may rule for time, yet it always leaves behind trauma, scars, and lingering question. Was it justice or something far darker? When punishment crossed into sacred, what was left for breathing but to exist naked of dignity beneath silent gods and indifferent sky? Ancient Persia, powerful and influential empire, has long been associated with tales of cruelty and extreme punishment. Over centuries, these stories have shaped public imagination, often portraying Persian justice system as merciless and grotesque. However, such portrayals deserve deeper and more nuanced examination. While Persia did enforce harsh punishments, nature and intention of these penalties have frequently been misinterpreted or exaggerated, particularly by those with political or cultural biases. Much of what we understand about Persian punishments stems from Greek historians such as Herodotus and Ctesias. Both wrote during or after periods of deep hostility between Persia and Greece, especially during Greco-Persian wars. These writers were not just historians, but storytellers catering to audience that viewed Persians as enemies. Their descriptions were often colored by national rivalry and cultural superiority. Herodotus, for instance, is famous for blending myth with history. Though often celebrated as father of historical writing, his work mixes observed events with hearsay and legend. Ctesias, who served as physician at Persian court, also presented vivid and disturbing tales of Persian cruelty. Many scholars now believe Ctesias deliberately exaggerated events to thrill his readers, describing punishments that shocked and horrified but lacked corroboration from other sources. Later writers like Plutarch further propagated these accounts, often without verifying accuracy. These authors framed Persian rulers as cruel and theatrical despots, obsessed with power and punishment. Among most infamous examples are stories of scaphism, horrific method involving boats, insects, and slow death, or prisoner executions with molten gold. These tales are so extreme that modern historians question their authenticity, especially in absence of solid archaeological evidence. This sensationalizing tendency has distorted broader picture. In reality, ancient Persia was not uniquely cruel when compared to its contemporaries. Roman Empire, for example, employed crucifixion and gladiatorial execution. In ancient Greece, stoning and exile were common. Assyrians and Babylonians practiced impalement, mutilation, and public torture. Even in ancient Israel, burning and stoning were used as capital punishment methods. Brutality, sadly, was feature of many ancient justice systems. What distinguished Persia was not just punishment severity, but structure and ideology underpinning its legal code. Achaemenid Empire, one of Persia's most enduring dynasties, established relatively advanced legal system. It included judges, formal trials, written laws, and procedures for appealing decisions. Punishments were often harsh, but they were part of organized effort to maintain social order and uphold values empire held sacred. Honor, truth, and loyalty were prized in Persian society, and justice was meant to reflect and protect these ideals. While physical punishments were common, they were not always default option. Fines, exile, and imprisonment were also used, depending on crime and offenders' social status. Religion played a significant role in shaping Persian justice concepts. Zoroastrianism, empire's dominant faith, emphasized cosmic struggle between truth, Asha, and falsehood, Dayuj. This belief held that every person had duty to contribute to universe balance. Moral actions, therefore, were not merely civic duties, but spiritual obligations. Liar, for example, wasn't just breaking law. They were tipping cosmic order scale toward evil. This worldview may explain harsh criminal treatment. Severe punishments were seen not only as deterrents, but as necessary corrections to restore moral and spiritual harmony. Some legendary punishments, like corrupt Judge Sesamne's flaying, appear in multiple historical accounts and are likely grounded in truth. Sesamnes was reportedly skinned alive for taking bribes. His flayed skin used to cover his successor's chair as grim reminder of corruption cost. Similarly, rebel Menelaus' suffocation in ash-filled tower is another account that, while disturbing, may have been grounded in actual practice. Yet more exotic tales, such as insect torture or molten gold pouring down someone's throat, are often viewed as fictional or exaggerated, especially since no physical or legal records from Persia confirm these methods. Modern historians now encourage a more balanced view. While undeniable that Persian Empire could be unforgiving, it was also legalistic, complex, and rooted in deeply held beliefs about justice and truth. Much of its feared brutality was part of broader imperial strategy designed to instill obedience and discourage rebellion. In that sense, it was no different from other empires of its time. What makes ancient Persia remarkable is not its cruelty but sophistication of its legal and moral philosophy, which combined strict punishment with clear sense of cosmic and social order. As we revisit these stories today, it's important to consider motives of those who recorded them and context in which they were written. Rather than relying solely on dramatic accounts filled with horror and spectacle, scholars now turn to Persian legal texts, inscriptions, and administrative records to paint fuller picture. Through this lens, we see empire that was disciplined rather than depraved, structured rather than sadistic. In end, ancient Persia's justice system was shaped by a blend of practical governance, religious beliefs, and imperial authority. It may have been harsh, but it was not without reason or order. True legacy of Persian punishment lies not just in its brutality, but in how it was embedded within larger framework of law, power, and belief. As we close this examination of ancient Persian justice, we're left with profound questions that echo through history. Were these punishments truly about maintaining divine order, or were they tools of political control disguised as cosmic necessity? The Persian Empire's approach to justice reveals civilization grappling with fundamental questions that still challenge us today. How do we balance individual rights with social order? What role should fear play in maintaining law? And when does punishment cross line from justice into cruelty? Perhaps most unsettling is how Persian authorities transformed human suffering into public theater, making entire communities complicit in state-sanctioned violence. This wasn't random brutality, but calculated system designed to embed fear so deeply into social fabric that rebellion became unthinkable. Yet we must also acknowledge that within this harsh framework existed genuine attempts at legal structure, moral philosophy, and spiritual meaning. Persian justice wasn't simply about power. It was about their understanding of cosmic balance and divine will. The challenge for modern observers is to study these practices without either romanticizing or demonizing them. Ancient Persia was neither uniquely civilized nor uniquely barbaric. It was complex society wrestling with universal human challenges through lens of its own time, beliefs, and circumstances. What emerges from this exploration is a picture of justice system that was simultaneously sophisticated and savage, spiritual and political, ordered and terrifying. It reminds us that throughout history, societies have struggled to define justice and determine appropriate responses to those who violate social contracts. The Persian model, with its emphasis on truth, cosmic order and visible deterrence, offers both warning and insight into how legal systems can serve multiple masters: law, religion, politics, and social control. As we reflect on these ancient practices, we might ask ourselves, in our modern world, how do we ensure that pursuit of justice doesn't become mere exercise in power? How do we maintain social order without sacrificing human dignity? And what can we learn from civilizations that chose fear as their primary tool of governance? The dust has settled on Persian execution chambers, and silence has replaced screams that once echoed through ancient squares. But questions raised by their approach to justice remain as relevant today as they were 3 millennia ago. In studying ancient Persian justice, we don't just examine distant civilization. We hold up mirror to our own ongoing struggle to balance order with compassion, deterrence with dignity, and law with humanity. The Persian Empire's legacy reminds us that justice, in any age, reflects not just our laws but our deepest beliefs about human nature, social responsibility, and divine will. Whether we see their system as necessary order or organized cruelty depends largely on our own values and understanding of what justice should achieve. Perhaps that's most important lesson ancient Persian justice can teach us. Every legal system is ultimately reflection of civilization that creates it, and every punishment reveals as much about judges as it does about judged. What are your thoughts on brutal justice systems of ancient empires like Persia? Were these punishments reflection of order or something far darker? Share your thoughts in comments below. And must like and subscribe the channel and hit the bell icon button for more interesting histories.